Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to welcome the introduction of this legislation and the work being done by MPs from across the House and by voluntary organisations in ensuring that the needs of victims are recognised and prioritised in this bill. I'd also like to thank my honourable member for Canterbury for her bravery on this. In 2018-2019, the number of domestic violence-related crimes increased by a quarter. Since lockdown measures were introduced in the UK, calls to the National Domestic Abuse Helpline have soared by 49%. Victims of domestic abuse have been waiting for the introduction of more thought-out protections for decades, and this bill truly has a chance to be transformative. However, we must get this right to ensure that the huge increase we've seen in domestic violence is not an annual expectation. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to start by making representations to the House on behalf of victims of domestic violence who are often denied even the most basic provisions. This ongoing public health crisis has highlighted the plight felt by people with no recourse to public funds on a regular basis. I've been contacted by several constituents since the emergency COVID measures were introduced who have no recourse to public funds, who have found themselves completely abandoned by this government and in some cases destitute. The inability to work, seek help from friends and family, and move around freely means that people with no recourse to public funds are having to rely solely on the income earner in their household without access to welfare or housing support. Victims of domestic violence are forced to remain in their abusive household for fear of homelessness and absolute poverty. Alarmingly, over 50% of migrant women surveyed said that they believe the Home Office and police would believe a perpetrator over them and therefore fearful of seeking help. Unfortunately, this fear is supported by the fact that over half of police forces in England and Wales confirmed they share victims' details with the Home Office for immigration control purposes. When a call to 999 may be the person's only options of survival, it is disgraceful that these deterrents exist. This is especially important during COVID-19, when usual survival mechanisms for victims have been cut off. The lockdown measures introduced against coronavirus have made assessing usual support systems difficult for all victims of domestic violence, and it's clear that this is not being addressed within the seriousness necessary. The bill does not go far enough to provide LGBT and disability specialist provision. The government must act urgently so that the needs of domestic abuse victims are represented during the emergency COVID discussions. They should therefore be ensuring that the domestic abuse commissioners include the senior COVID-19 planning forums, including COBRA. The government must also start by making preparations to support victims of domestic violence after the lockdown measures are eased. Voluntary organisations providing support for domestic violence have warned that the costs are likely to surge post-COVID. If the government is serious about tackling domestic violence, then there must be adequate long-term funding that reaches diverse specialist services. It's essential that the funding for charity organisations is made available and that also local authorities are given clear guidance in supporting victims of domestic violence going forward. Local authorities have been working at the forefront alongside voluntary organisations to provide support and assistance to victims of domestic violence during this crisis. However, there is a clear lack of specialist support available in many areas of local government. When the crisis is over and the government declares business as usual, what will happen to those victims who are currently being housed in hotels and empty homes? Local authorities do not have the funding or expertise to tackle this looming crisis going forward. And without clear guidance, it will cost lives. Madam Deputy Speaker, I ask that the government makes clear and decisive actions alongside the introduction of this bill to urgently support the most vulnerable in our society and ensure that the social crisis does not follow this COVID-19 crisis.